Looks like we've got a stack of articles about the happenings at Warner Bros. Games. And it seems like it's a bit more than just some games getting canceled. There are studio closures, too, which of course affects people's careers and the future of projects they were working on.
Yeah, that's right. When you look at everything together, it really does seem like a big change in strategy from Warner Bros. Games.
I guess we can start with the cancellation of the Wonder Woman game. It seemed a bit out of the blue, especially with how well superhero games tend to do.
Yeah, it's interesting. When you think about how successful other DC games have been, like the Batman Arkham series, and one of the articles mentioned that the Wonder Woman project had already cost over $100 million. So that makes it even more of a noteworthy cancellation.
Yeah, it really does. Makes you wonder what was going on behind the scenes. I guess bringing comic book characters to video games can be tricky.
It can. And while the Batman Arkham series really hit the mark with players, other DC properties haven't really had the same consistent success in the video game world.
Then there's the closure of Monolith Productions, the studio that made the Middle-earth games. They've been around for 31 years, and they created the Nemesis system, which was pretty groundbreaking.
Well, that system was a big turning point in game design. It made enemy encounters so much deeper, and it really influenced how a lot of other games approached AI. Players could really see how their actions had consequences, as they made rivals out of certain enemies.
From what I read, it seems like the closure might be related to rising costs and the long development cycles that Monolith was known for. Their games were definitely ambitious, but I guess maybe that ambition wasn't sustainable in the current economic situation.
AAA game development is in a tough spot right now. There's a lot of pressure to make games with cutting-edge graphics and expansive gameplay, and that all costs money. It makes you think about how studios can balance a creative vision with, financial realities.
We're also seeing this with the closure of Player First Games, the studio that made MultiVersus. This seems to be tied to the trend of gaming companies reevaluating the live service model.
Yeah, the live service model is a lot to deal with. You need to constantly have new content and updates to keep players engaged. And that takes a lot of resources. It's not easy to find the right balance.
Especially with how many ways there are to entertain yourself these days, like streaming or being on social media. Games really need to step up their game to keep people interested.
Right. It's a really competitive landscape out there. And for live service games, keeping players coming back is essential. If you can't do that, the whole model just crumbles.
Looks like Warner Bros. Might be trying to make things simpler and focusing on their more well-known properties, like Harry Potter and Mortal Kombat and DC and Game of Thrones.
It does seem like that's the way they're going. Those franchises come with audiences already, and the fact that people recognize them gives them an advantage when it comes to marketing. Warner Bros. Has been pretty open about wanting to get back to being profitable and growing, and focusing on these big names might be part of how they plan to do that.
One of the articles even had a statement from Warner Bros. They said, "We've had to make some really tough choices about how we structure our studios, and our investments are going towards making the best possible games using our key franchises, Harry Potter, Mortal Kombat, DC, and Game of Thrones."
That definitely points to them being more calculated. Instead of trying to create new IPs, they're sticking to what they know will work.
All this makes you wonder about what kinds of games we'll be playing in the future. Will there be less innovation, or will smaller studios step up and fill the gaps?
That's the big question. If the bigger studios are mostly focused on established franchises, what happens to those developers who want to make something new?
And what about the financial side of things? Are there bigger trends in the industry that are pushing Warner Bros., and maybe even other companies, in this direction?
The gaming industry is dealing with a lot of pressure, from both inside and outside. Maybe by taking a look at that pressure, we can get a better understanding of what's happening. The gaming world has seen its share of economic ups and downs, for sure. And right now, the industry is dealing with inflation. And people are being careful with how they spend their money on entertainment, especially now that things are getting back to normal after the pandemic.
Yeah, there are so many options for entertainment now, like streaming services and social media. So games are really having to fight to keep people engaged.
Exactly. And you have to remember that the cost of making games has gone way up. So studios are under more pressure to pick projects they know will succeed. It's a high-stakes situation for sure.
So from a business point of view, it makes sense that they'd want to focus on those well-known franchises. You're basically reducing risk because you already have that dedicated fan base.
Yeah, with those big-name franchises, there's some sense of how well they'll do. You have an idea of how many people will want a new Harry Potter or Mortal Kombat game.
But it makes me think about whether we'll see less variety in games going forward. If the bigger studios are only going to put money into those guaranteed hits, What happens to those new innovative ideas?
That's a good point. The success of those indie games and smaller studios shows that people want those fresh experiences. But those projects don't usually need the huge budgets that AAA games do.
So do you think this means the industry is splitting, with the big studios focusing on the huge franchise titles, and the smaller studios filling in the gaps with the more experimental games?
It's possible we might end up with a gaming world that's more diverse overall, with something for everyone, depending on what they like and what they're looking for in a game.
What about those studios that are somewhere in between? Not quite indie, but not a huge AAA studio. What happens to them in the long run?
Those mid-tier studios are in a difficult spot. They're facing the same rising costs as everyone else, so for them to survive, they're going to have to find ways to stand out and appeal to a specific audience.
And for us players, does this mean we'll have fewer choices? If the industry goes all in on those established franchises, are we all going to end up playing the same kinds of games?
I think it comes down to how gamers react. If people really want something different, something new, the market will change to give it to them. Maybe it means more support for smaller studios, or even trying out different ways to fund games, like crowdfunding.
These closures at Warner Bros. Games really highlight that there are people behind all of this. Developers are losing their jobs, and projects they've put so much effort into are getting put on hold.
Absolutely. It's easy to get focused on the business side, the money and profits, but we have to remember that these decisions affect real people's lives and careers.
It reminds us to think about the people who make these games, and not just the games themselves.
It would be interesting to see what those developers from these studios do next. Maybe some of them will go into indie development and find new ways to be creative and express their passion for making games.
Maybe something good will come out of this. Maybe we'll see more independent studios, and they'll bring us even more diverse gaming experiences.
It's definitely something to watch. The gaming industry is always changing, and even these hard times can lead to exciting new developments.
So now the question is, what happens next for Warner Bros. Games? Makes you wonder if other gaming companies are watching all of this, seeing how this strategy works out for Warner Bros. If it's a big success for them financially, maybe we'll see more companies switching their focus to these big franchises.
Yeah, it could happen. The gaming industry is always keeping an eye on the big companies like Warner Bros. The choices they make often influence what happens in the whole market.
But then you start to think about,
Yeah.
what if that leads to less creativity in the industry? If everybody's just playing it safe, sticking to what they know will work, are we going to miss out on those new innovative ideas?
There's always a chance of that. But I don't think the desire for originality in games is going to just disappear. It might just mean that those smaller studios become even more important. They can be like those incubators where new ideas are born.
So instead of those big studios pushing the boundaries, those fresh ideas might come from indie developers or smaller teams, the ones who are more willing to take risks.
That could be a really exciting outcome. Imagine a gaming landscape where the big studios give us those huge, spectacular games with the familiar franchises. And then the independent developers are exploring new genres and pushing the creative limits of game design.
That would make the industry more dynamic and diverse. Players would have so many different experiences to choose from, based on what they like.
And it could even have a positive impact on those big franchise games. The pressure to innovate wouldn't go away entirely. They'd still need to keep evolving, keep those experiences fresh, especially with smaller studios offering something different.
So maybe it's not about one type of game replacing another. Maybe it's more about having a balanced ecosystem where both kinds of studios can be successful.
That's definitely an optimistic way to look at it. But it's important to remember that we don't know for sure what's going to happen in the future of gaming. There are so many factors involved. And the industry is always changing.
These things that have been happening at Warner Bros. Games really show the challenges and pressures that studios are facing today. It'll be interesting to see how this all plays out, not just for Warner Bros., but for the entire gaming industry.
And as we watch this unfold, it's crucial to remember the people who make these games, those individuals who are so passionate about what they do. Their careers and their livelihoods are being affected by these changes.
It reminds us to look beyond the news headlines and think about how these decisions impact people's lives. These are the folks who put their creativity and hard work into giving us the games we love.
So as you keep exploring this topic, keep those developers and their stories in mind. They're the ones shaping the future of gaming. And their experiences can teach us a lot about this industry that's always evolving.
Thanks for sharing your expertise with us today and for giving us such a thoughtful insights into this complex situation.
It's been my pleasure.